Welcome to The Explainer. Let's jump right into the content today because we're unpacking a really fascinating and honestly universally relatable puzzle of modern civilization: how governments actually manage public finance. Think about it for a second. Every single day we rely on essential services. We're talking education, healthcare, roads, public safety. But paying for them, well, that is a whole different story. Today, we're exploring the core economic theory that attempts to solve this massive puzzle.
It's a question that hits right at your wallet, doesn't it? How much should the government take from your income, and exactly how much should it spend on those public services? Deciding how much to collect and where to allocate it is a literally monumental task for any state. It's a really delicate balancing act that affects every single one of us every time we get a paycheck or, make a purchase at the store.
Okay, let's dive into this. Our roadmap today covers 5 quick parts: the public finance dilemma, maximum social advantage explained, visualizing the perfect balance, real-world measurement limits, and finally, the history of the principle.
Section 1. The public finance dilemma.
So, governments are kind of caught in a massive trap. It's a constant push and pull. On one hand, if the government collects way too much tax, it actively hurts your ability to spend, save, or invest. It totally stifles economic energy. But, and it's a big but, if they tax too little and spending drops, our essential services suffer. Roads crumble, education falters, and overall social welfare just declines. What governments desperately need is a golden rule to balance this scale.
Section 2. Maximum social advantage explained. To understand this golden rule, we need to look at economist Hugh Dalton and grasp 2 really key concepts he laid out. The first is marginal social benefit, or MSB. Basically, this is the extra benefit to society from 1 additional rupee spent by the government. Imagine your local school. If the government spends 10 lakh rupees to build smart classrooms, the MSB is incredibly high because students' learning improves dramatically. The benefit to society is tangible, it's real.
But, as we all know, that money doesn't just magically appear out of thin air. And that brings us to the second term, marginal social sacrifice, or MSS. To fund those exact same smart classrooms, a 10 lakh rupee tax has to be collected from the public. This means everyday families have less disposable income, less pocket money, fewer savings. That loss, that is the sacrifice. MSS measures the extra pain caused to the public for every additional rupee collected.
So here is where Hugh Dalton ties the whole shebang together. Think of it like a giant balancing scale. He stated that the state should balance the marginal social benefit of public expenditure with the marginal social sacrifice of taxation. The ultimate goal, the absolute maximum advantage for society, is achieved at the exact moment when the benefit we get from government spending perfectly equals the sacrifice we make through taxes.
This actually gives policymakers some really clear decision rules to follow. Think about it. If the benefit of an educational program is way higher than the tax sacrifice required to fund it, then MSB is greater than MSS. The government should absolutely increase spending. But consider the reverse. Say the government decides to spend money on extravagant luxury renovations for administrative offices, and they raise taxes heavily to do it. Families end up suffering far more tax burden than any actual benefit gained. Here, MSS is greater than MSB. It's a bad policy, plain and simple, and spending needs to be reduced.
Section 3. Visualizing the perfect balance.
And this brilliantly illustrates the opposing forces at play perfectly on paper. First, you have the benefit curve sloping downwards. Why? Well, because of diminishing utility. The first million spent on a new hospital actively saves lives, right? But the 100th million spent on that exact same hospital, it probably only adds marginal aesthetic improvements. The benefit drops over time. Opposing this, you have the sacrifice curve slipping upwards. Small taxes are easy enough to pay, but as taxes get higher and higher, they eat into essential living costs. They cause increasing pain. The magic happens where these 2 forces intersect. Point A. That is the sweet spot of maximum social advantage.
Let's ground this in some actual hard numbers to make it concrete. Imagine tracking tax and spending from 10 to 60 crores. At just 10 crores, the benefit is a massive 100 utility points, while the tax sacrifice is only 20. That gives us a huge net social advantage of positive 80. As spending moves to 20 and 30 crores, the benefit drops and the sacrifice rises, sure, but we're still in the positive. The government is doing solid work here.
So the absolute crucial point is exactly at 40 crore. At 40 crore, the marginal social benefit drops to 50 utility points, and the marginal social sacrifice rises to meet it perfectly at 50 utility points.
MSB equals MSS. The net advantage is 0, which actually means no more advantage can possibly be extracted. If the government pushes further to 50 or 60 crores, the sacrifice will exceed the benefit. We'd enter this dangerous zone of overtaxation and overspending. So 40 crore is the absolute magical intersection, the absolute peak of optimization.
Section 4. Real-world measurement and limitations.
Okay, plot twist time. This math looks incredible on paper, but in reality, it is incredibly messy. First, measuring the benefit side is so tough. How do you actually put a literal price tag on a safer street or a cleaner environment? A lot of public spending creates non-monetary benefits. Plus, there's a massive time lag. If you invest heavily in primary education today, the economic benefits won't show up in the data for another 15 or 20 years. Trying to perfectly measure instant benefits is fundamentally pretty misleading.
And measuring the sacrifice side? Just as complicated. Let's talk about tax capacity. A 500 rupee tax might be basically negligible for a wealthy business owner, but it can absolutely devastate a low-income family. You can't just uniformly measure that sacrifice across the board. Throw in hidden indirect taxes like GST, where the burden isn't even directly visible, and then administrative leakages like corruption, which totally distorts the actual sacrifice statistics, and Dalton's perfect math really starts to fracture.
Then, of course, you've got the human element, politics, and aggregation. The theory kind of assumes you can sum up the diverse needs of an entire population into one neat number. Actually, scratch that. You really can. A subsidy on electric vehicles is awesome for urban commuters, but totally useless for rural populations. Furthermore, governments are run by politicians who naturally want to get reelected. They might favor short-term populist choices, like handing out free electricity right before an election, because it wins votes, even if it ignores long-term fiscal discipline and overall social advantage.
Section 5. History of the principle.
Let's move along and see how this built historically. It starts way back with Adam Smith, who laid down the early rules of fair taxation. Then, David Ricardo stepped in and really highlighted the heavy burden of taxation, warning everyone about the sacrifice side. Next, Hugh Dalton took those ideas and crystallized them into the MSB equals MSS formula we explored today. Later on, A.C. Pigou linked this to welfare economics, and finally, Richard A. Musgrave integrated Dalton's principle directly into the modern functions of government finance, things like allocation, distribution, and stabilization. It's really a fascinating chain of thinkers refining one core idea over centuries.
Which brings us to a final, deeply provocative limitation from the source material to leave you with today. The principle of maximum social advantage is ultimately a tool for pure efficiency. It just wants to maximize the total benefit. But what happens if, to achieve that maximum total benefit, the poorest citizens are bearing the brunt of the taxes, while the wealthiest citizens are enjoying all the shiny new infrastructure? It completely ignores equity. It ignores distributional concerns. It leaves us to wonder, in the pursuit of the perfect mathematical advantage, does efficiency matter more than fairness and justice? Definitely something to think about next time you look at a government budget. Thank you so much for learning with us today on The Explainer.